The mayor of New Orleans has just given a speech that is going viral because of the fact that he has said something that a lot of politicians are afraid to say. Now, the whole speech had to do with the fact that New Orleans has taken down 4 statues that were dedicated to Confederate soldiers. And of course, this has led to a lot of heated debate. Some who argue that the statue should have remained up, others who argue that no, it's actually a terrible reminder of the way African Americans were treated in American history, and it's offensive, so it should be taken down. Well, Mayor Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans says, look, here is the reality of these statues. They're wrong, and this is why I'm taking them down. The city of New Orleans removed a 16-foot statue of General Robert E. Lee from the center of Lee Circle. This was the last of 4 Confederate monuments that were taken down in the city after the city council had declared them to be a public nuisance. Now, I am going to play one of 2 videos that show the mayor giving this speech, and you'll get an understanding for why it went viral. Take a look.
So let's start with the facts. The historic record is clear. Robert E. Lee, Jeff Davis, PGT Beauregard statues were not erected to just honor these men, but as part of a movement which became known as the cult of the lost cause. This cult had one goal and one goal only: through monuments and through other means to rewrite history, to hide the truth, which is that the Confederacy was on the wrong side of humanity. First erected 166 years after the founding of our cities, 19 years after the Civil War. These monuments that we took down were meant to rebrand the history of our city and the ideals of the Confederacy. It is self-evident that these men did not fight for the United States of America. They fought against it. They may have been warriors, but in this cause, they were not patriots. These statues are not just stone and metal. They're not just innocent remembrances of a benign history. These monuments celebrate a fictional, sanitized Confederacy, ignoring the death, ignoring the enslavement, ignoring the terror that it actually stood for.
So some strong language there. Again, you don't hear a lot of politicians talk about how unpatriotic the Confederates were during the Civil War. You see a lot of politicians using language carefully as a way of avoiding offending people. And so I think the fact that he used such strong language in that speech is why it's getting so much attention. He was strong. He was extremely strong in what he was saying.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And the argument against it is like you're taking down some kind of legacy, some kind of history, and I'm fine with that. It's sending a message when you put out a statue like this in the middle of a big public square. Someone walking by would look at it and say, okay, apparently they like this person. You don't put up statues of people that you vilify unless it is very clear that you are vilifying it in a specific context.
I mean, that's what the mayor was saying with the lost cause, which is this whole false narrative or false history, if that's how you want to categorize it, that minimizes or erases slavery's role in the Civil War and builds this idea that it's this noble cause and it's honorable and you're preserving the South, but it's not based on reality. If we just accepted everything that was considered historic or part of history as something that we would celebrate and memorialize forever, do you know how ridiculous our society should be or would be if that happened?
Right, so let me clarify something, because I think what you guys are saying is no one's trying to erase history, right? There's a difference between learning about historical truths in a museum versus having Confederate statues in a public area that essentially celebrates those individuals. So I don't think that it's a good idea to ever do things including burning books or pretending as though dark elements of our past don't exist. Those are things that we should learn about. Those are things that we should know about. But unfortunately, what has happened in terms of the Civil War is this ridiculous whitewashing of the situation. And I remember one of the first segments that I did regarding the Confederate flag got an interesting response because I talked about the Confederacy and how they wanted to maintain this society that is okay with slaves, and people lost it's not about slavery, it's about property rights.
Right, those comments are already in the comment section.
Like right now.
After seeing the title of this video.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's important for people to learn about the Confederates. I think it's important for people to learn about what actually happened in the Civil War, but it doesn't make sense to celebrate individuals who literally risk their lives in order to, have slavery, avoid abolishing slavery.
Also, there's still I did a song about this on our Facebook page called "There's a Shit Ton of Racist Monuments in America." There's at least 9 high schools named for Robert E. Lee still, and there's Jefferson Davis County, and I understand people who say like Confederate soldier memorials are remembering the dead who fought for a certain cause, and part of that argument is along the lines of, listen, whether you support the cause or not, support the troops. And that kind of instinct, I'm not clearly gonna get behind it. I'm sure there are a lot of touching stories of families who were torn apart because one person was like, listen, I don't support the Confederacy's support of slavery, but I need to protect my farm against General Sherman, who's about to annihilate it and burn it to the ground because that's his strategy. Those are the kinds of things that are different than, say, like the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Edmund Pettus ran the Klan. Also, Nathan Bedford Forrest's bust is in the State House in Nashville. Like, it's in there, you walk past it, and he started the Klan. Now, I don't think every statue by someone who had a role in the Confederacy should be removed, but I don't think any of these statues that were removed were like artistically compelling statues. They're just a statue. They aren't telling a specific kind of story. There's one statue that should never be destroyed, and it's of Nathan Bedford Forrest, and it's outside Nashville, and somebody made it themselves, and it is the craziest looking thing that's like bright gold, and his eyes look insane, and those kinds of things are so batshit nuts that I think they should stay.
That's interesting.
Because they have artistic value?
Because I don't know, I just think it's so awesome to look at, and it's as ridiculous as the idea of making the statue in the first place.
Right. Well, there are politicians who disagree with taking these statues down. As you can imagine, a lot of those politicians reside in Mississippi. So I want to give you a statement from Representative Carl Oliver from Mississippi, who was enraged at the thought that these Confederate statues would be taken down. Here's what he said. If the, and I use the term loosely, leadership of Louisiana wishes to, in a Nazi-ish fashion, burn books or destroy historical monuments of our history, they should be lynched. That is a statement that he put up on a public forum on social media. And as you can imagine, one of the biggest arguments against these statues is the fact that they perpetuate, a racist culture, that they celebrate people who fought in order to keep slavery intact in the United States. And the fact that he used the word lynched.
Yes.
You're proving their point, right? I mean, that is an unacceptable term.
It's revealing.
It is very
that you would
revealing.
Choose that word.
Yeah.
Listen, there's one, that guy's ridiculous.
Right.
And it's not even like he misspoke. Some people, it's not even meant they should be pinched. He said they should be like, that's misspeaking. This guy is like, you know what? This is our proud heritage. And usually people that I end up kind of at least understanding where they're coming from say stuff like, we have great food and we have great architecture or something like that. It's like, okay, cool, just you had a lot of slavery. This one is like, oh, you aren't even veiling your racism. You're putting it right out there in front of everyone.
Exactly, and again, reinforcing the argument that people continuously make about why these Confederate statues are wrong. By the way, just, look, that kind of language is unacceptable, period, regardless of who you are, right? You should not be inciting violence.
Right.
Even if you're just an average citizen, don't incite violence. But if you are a representative, using that kind of language is so incredibly dangerous and is so incredibly irresponsible. And unfortunately, he didn't realize that until enough people criticized him for it and called him out. And then he released an apology. So to be fair, let me read you his apology about this. He says, in an effort to express my passion for preserving all historical monuments, I acknowledge the word lynched was wrong. I am very sorry. It is in no way ever an appropriate term.
But the action is fine with me. Like I shouldn't have used
the illegal killing.
He said the word. He said he chose the wrong word, lynched. But he doesn't. It still seems he doesn't say we shouldn't have violence. At least in that quote.
Right.
He's saying like I said the word I shouldn't have, which I've gone out of my way to kind of avoid. There are organizations, a lot of these monuments are put up by the Sons and Daughters of the Confederacy, 2 separate organizations that finance things like the ability in a handful of states to still get the battle flag, which is the X, on like the one from whatever it is, like what's the TV show that they did?
The
Dukes of Hazzard, that flag. To have that on your license plate still. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it's not just the Confederacy. Like in Wilmington, there's this place called the Hugh McRae Playground and Splash Pad.
That sounds kind of fun.
Which is super fun, and it's like take your kids on a hot day, play around, there's a slide, water slides and everything. Do you know who Hugh McRae was? This is a guy who, when the city council got integrated, he organized essentially a brute squad to go around, and he bragged about killing black people and intimidating them away from voting. And he has the Hugh McRae Park Playground and Splash Pad.
Man.
The McCarran Airport in Vegas, McCarran, although he was really good for aviation, was an anti-Semite. We still name things after them. We need to take into consideration who we're naming things after. And it's not okay. In the University of Texas, in Austin, there is a mall that you walk down, and on the sides are things like the head of the Postmaster General of the Confederacy, and they're all lined up, and there's a big controversy on campus. And one of the things that the defenders of it say is that the guy who financed and organized the financing of this part of the campus decorated it with his heroes. So since he did all the work of getting the money, he decorated it with his heroes, like the guy who made sure that like the correspondence from one general in the Confederacy and the other in their attempt to defend slavery and kill the North. Like that's the kind of people, and just because he organized the financing of it, we should leave these people's statues up? I just don't think so. Right. Especially on a place as like liberal and cool as the University of Texas, Austin. I don't know, that's that. I did a lot of research.
Is anybody buying his apology?
I don't think so.
Because I don't even care about buying it because I don't care if he means it or not. He said, well, I regret I used the term lynching because I didn't hear that before. I never heard of it. It slipped my mind. I was writing in a Facebook post where specific racists like to go and write things. You notice the racists pop up on Facebook all the time with their long posts, and then afterwards go, oh, I had this slip of the pen, slip of the keyboard when I was typing the word lynching. But you made sure you had a very careful, detailed message the whole rest of the time. You know, just because someone apologizes doesn't mean that they deserve for me to accept it. F you and your apology.
Right.
Yeah, I apologize, I'm so sorry. I don't accept it, get the hell out of here. You still don't deserve to be in that position.
And keep in mind that 2 state representatives liked it. And then when one of them was called out, he was like, oh, I know nothing about that. I might have accidentally liked it.
I do that
You
sometimes.
know what you did.
I'll like
No.
Instagram posts without like really, I'll just automatically
don't
do
like
it.
everything.
Yeah, no, that's I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
I'm not
well,
saying I'm cool.
And then I wanted to add one more thing about this. Look, I think it's also interesting that Representative Oliver represents the same district in Mississippi where Emmett Till was lynched. And so these are all things that, you know, should at least, he should be conscious of these things, okay? And he should understand, you know, what a word like lynched really means. And I think people use language way too loosely, and
it's not just, and with this, it's not just statues. Like the state flags of many southern states are odes to the battle flag, and then look at Mississippi's state flag. It's a mix of the stars and bars and the Confederate battle flag, and they voted over 60% in the state house to keep the 2 versions of the Confederate flag on their state flag. And these all weren't the pre-existing flags of Mississippi, you know, Georgia, Alabama, whatever. Like the Georgia flag that they just changed is just the stars and bars, which is like the official Confederacy flag with the Georgia logo in the middle. They changed it after the Civil War to maintain this pride in the lost cause.
The lost cause that is, by the way, a whitewashed fake version of history.
Podcast The Young Turks anytime you want. tytnetwork.com/join.
I think it's weird.
No, it's not weird. In fact, you'll think,
I'm like a smart person.
do it now, tytnetwork.com/join.